Ramin Sehtoodeh. Ramin is also the co-editor-in-chief for Variety, so he's running a lot of things right now. And here's my really good friend. I'm so glad to have you back here.
Hi, Alex. Nice to see you.
So when Trump said that after the election I lost, that instant thing, did you think, wait a minute, what did he just admit to? I mean, I'm curious how you interpreted that.
To me, it was, this is all an act, right? He denied that he lost the election. It was part of performance art. He's a very successful reality star for many years, for 14 seasons. And one of the arguments of the book is that Donald Trump is a reality star, and he's running the country as a reality star. He's campaigning as a reality star. He knows how to get headlines. He knows how to energize his base. He's using the same techniques he honed on The Apprentice in the Oval Office. And so for me, that was a very telling moment. And he was honest. And then he kind of did a U-turn and corrected himself and continued with these election lies and this act that he's been keeping up in public.
I'm thinking about how he's going about selecting a vice president right now. It seems very Apprentice-like, reality TV-like, right?
It is. It's like he's looking for the winner of The Apprentice. He's looking for a co-star. And on the show, what was always so interesting is that the winners of The Apprentice would become spokespeople for the Trump organization, right? He would say, I'm looking for the next great business leader, but they were really helping promote Donald Trump. So he was helping himself.
Yeah. So you spent hours more than any other journalist put together. I mean, you've got more hours interviewing him since he left the White House. Give me your sense of a takeaway, how he feels about hosting The Apprentice, because you write, Trump sees his campaigns and his presidency as extensions of his reality show. His experience on it informs how he makes decisions.
It does. And so he was always rewarded on The Apprentice by ratings. So that's why he's obsessed with crowd size. That's why he's obsessed with numbers. That's why he wants the most headlines, the most TV hits. He really is very attuned to how the media covers him and is very sensitive about negative coverage. But everything he learned on The Apprentice, he continues on as a politician.
It's interesting because hasn't he called on President Biden to take some sort of a cognitive test before this debate? And yet, when you did an interview with him, one that you had apparently done just a short time, maybe a couple of months before, he had no recollection of? I mean, what is your sense of his cognitive fortitude?
I think he struggles with short-term memory. His long-term memory works. He can remember things that happened years ago. But when it comes to short-term memory, it's not as sharp. My first interview with him was in May 2021. He loved it. I actually had a mask with me, which I didn't wear because he wasn't wearing a mask. So when I went back to get it, I overheard him saying it was like the best interview he's ever done. He was so happy to talk about The Apprentice. And then when I returned to Trump Tower a few months later, he had no recollection of our conversation or of me.
I mean, how did you react to that?
I thought it was very strange.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't like we just met. It was a lengthy conversation. It was different than anything else he'd been doing at the time because he got to talk about The Apprentice, his favorite thing.
So another thing that he does during interviews, we're going to put together two pieces of the tape you offered to us, parts where he talks about Joan Rivers and about intelligence briefings relative to Afghanistan, okay? Everybody, let's play that.
Great.
Joan said she was a Republican. Did you know that?
I thought she might have been a Republican.
Yeah.
I know one thing, she voted for me, according to what she said. The reason I'm doing this and devoting a lot of time to it, I have to get back up because, you know, I'm doing the whole thing with the Afghanistan. Has he blown that Afghanistan?
Okay, Joan Rivers, how could she have voted for him? She died in 2014.
She did die in 2014, and so he was confused about that. And that's when I talk about his short-term memory not really working. That was an example of that, where he perceived something to be true that wasn't true.
But that's the point I want to bring up. He perceives something to be true that is not true. How flagrant is that line of behavior?
I think it's consistent with who he is right now. And I think because of his past being on a reality show, he could create whatever reality he wanted, and the editors would find a way to make the narrative work. And so part of it also is conditioning of all the seasons of The Apprentice. He got to call the shots, and when he made stuff up, producers would find a way to make the falsehoods reality.
Interesting. The Afghanistan line as well, the implication being that he knows what's happening in Afghanistan, and yet we know that President Biden cut him off from the intelligence briefings once he left the White House. So how could he know? What's he looking into in Afghanistan?
That was odd as well. It felt like an actor who was playing a part again. He was acting like he was President of the United States and he had access to information about Afghanistan, but he clearly didn't.
Here's an interesting assessment of the book, and it frames Trump's rise to power not as a failure of our political system, but as a monster manufactured by reality TV, and that Trump and his supporters are still drunk on the buzz of celebrity. Explain what you mean.
That's from the Washington Post review of the book.
Right.
And one of the arguments of the book is that this is the key to understanding Donald Trump. It's the key to understanding how he's the nominee again and how he could become president of the United States again. And it is because of reality TV. The way he appealed to millions of voters around the country, was invited into living rooms across the country. People really like the Trump family because of The Apprentice. And I think anyone who wants to cover Trump or understand Trump, or any voter in this upcoming election, needs to understand his origin story. And that's what I really tried to uncover in my book.
Yeah. Talking about his penchant for money and making as much money as he possibly can, what all went down when he was going for $6 million an episode at the time when Friends was, I guess, approaching its last and final season? What happened there?
So in the first season of The Apprentice, Donald Trump was making $25,000 an episode, not very much money by TV standards. And then for the second season, once it became successful, he asked Jeff Zucker, who was running NBC at the time, for the combined salaries of all the Friends stars. So there were 6 stars on Friends that were making $1 million an episode. So he asked for $6 million an episode, which was a ridiculous figure for someone who was playing himself on a reality show. He's not Jennifer Aniston, Lisa Kudrow, and all the Friends combined. But Donald Trump always had a very high opinion of himself.
So he didn't get the $6 million.
He didn't get the $6 million. But he got a lot of the product placement on the show because Mark Burnett, who created The Apprentice, engineered a deal where they got all the money from all the profits from the product.
So you mean like
placement.
the Doritos?
Doritos, Cars, whatever brand was on the show in the earlier seasons, Donald Trump got to pocket all of that money. And sometimes these brands would write checks for millions of dollars that went directly to Donald Trump, which is why he was always promoting these different things on the show.
Last quick question. What do you want folks to take away from reading it?
I want them to have the front row seat to what Donald Trump is really like and get a real sense of who he is.
Okay. Ramin Sehtoodeh, I think you've done it in this book. Thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it.